The blood-red sun was setting over the dusty town of Keeler, California, when Abigail James first noticed the empty space beside her on the weathered wooden bench. 3 months she'd been in this frontier town, and 3 months she'd watched the sunset alone, the golden orb dipping behind the distant Sierra Nevada mountains, painting the sky in hues of crimson and amber that reminded her too much of the life she'd left behind. It was 1878, and the world had taken everything from Abigail: her husband, her home in Chicago, and finally her dignity. At 26, she was starting over in this harsh mining town where the silver boom was already beginning to fade like her memories of happier times. "Don't be fool yourself, Abby," she whispered, adjusting the simple brown skirt that covered her worn boots. "This is your life now." She reached up to tuck a wayward strand of auburn hair back into the loose bun at the nape of her neck, her green eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for answers in the fading light. The streets of Keeler were growing quiet as the miners and merchants headed toward the saloon or their homes. A cool breeze swept through the town, carrying the scent of dust and sage, whispering promises of the night to come. Abigail shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'd stay just a few minutes more, savoring the transition from day to night, before returning to her small room above the mercantile where she worked. "Mind if I sit a spell?" The deep voice startled her, and Abigail whipped her head around to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away. His broad shoulders were silhouetted against the dying light, casting his face in shadow beneath a worn leather hat. He was a stranger, and strangers in Keeler were rare these days. "I suppose it's a free country," she replied, sliding over slightly though the bench had ample room. "Much obliged, madam." His boots made a soft, scuffing noise as he approached, and when he sat, Abigail caught the scent of leather, horses, and something uniquely masculine. "Name's Cole Newman. Just rode in from Arizona Territory." Abigail nodded but didn't offer her name in return. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon where only a sliver of sun remained. The first star had appeared in the darkening eastern sky. "You come here often?" he asked, his voice as rough as the stubble lining his jaw. "Every evening," she answered simply. "Alone." The question hung in the air between them. Abigail turned to study him properly for the first time. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. Those eyes were a startling blue, like the sky at midday, and currently fixed on her with undisguised interest. His hair, visible beneath his hat, was the color of wet sand, and his hands resting casually on his thighs were strong and calloused. "Yes," she said finally. "Alone." Cole Newman nodded slowly, as if her answer told him more than just the simple fact. "It's a mighty pretty view," he said, gesturing toward the sunset. "It is," she agreed, wondering why she didn't feel the usual urge to escape conversation with a stranger. "Though I imagine you've seen finer in your travels." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps, but there's something to be said for shared beauty, don't you think, Miss?" "Mrs.," she corrected automatically. "Mrs. James, Abigail James, Mrs." "James," he repeated, tipping his hat slightly. "My apologies." "No need," she said. "My husband is dead." The words came out more abruptly than she intended, and she immediately regretted them. She wasn't in the habit of sharing her circumstances with strangers, particularly male ones. But Cole Newman didn't offer the usual platitudes. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "Life has a way of leaving us with empty spaces beside us, doesn't it?" Something in his words, or perhaps the quiet understanding in his voice, made her throat tighten unexpectedly. Abigail looked away quickly, blinking back the sudden moisture in her eyes. "What brings you to Keeler, Mr. Newman?" she asked, eager to change the subject. "Just passing through," he replied. "Heading to San Francisco eventually, got some business to attend to along the way." "Business?" she inquired, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled, a warm sound that somehow matched the dying embers of the sunset. "Nothing nefarious, I assure you. I'm a horse trader by profession, though I've worn many hats in my time. Including that rather worn one on your head," she quipped before she could stop herself. His laughter was genuine this time, and the sound of it made something flutter in Abigail's chest, a sensation she'd thought long dead. "This old thing has been with me through 3 territories and more dust storms than I can count," he said, touching the brim affectionately. "We've become rather attached to each other." The sun had completely disappeared now, leaving only a crimson glow along the horizon. Abigail knew it was time to return to her room, but for the first time since arriving in Keeler, she felt reluctant to leave her evening perch. "I should go," she said, gathering her shawl more tightly. "The mercantile opens early. You work at Jensen's." Cole asked, referring to the town's only general store. Abigail nodded. "Yes, Mr. Jensen was kind enough to offer me a position when I arrived." "Then perhaps I'll see you there tomorrow," Cole said, rising to his feet as she stood. "I'm in need of supplies before I move on." "Perhaps," she replied noncommittally, though something inside her hoped he would indeed appear at the store. "Good evening, Mr. Newman." "Madam," he said, tipping his hat once more. "Thank you for sharing your sunset with me." As Abigail walked back toward the mercantile, she could feel his eyes following her. For the first time in months, she felt something other than grief or emptiness. She wasn't sure what to call it, not happiness, certainly, but maybe something like curiosity or possibility. The feeling stayed with her as she climbed the narrow stairs to her room, lit the small lamp on her bedside table, and prepared for bed. As she lay beneath the thin blanket, listening to the distant sounds of the saloon piano and the occasional burst of laughter, Abigail found herself wondering if Cole Newman would indeed come to the store tomorrow, and if he would join her again on the bench at sunset. She fell asleep with the image of startling blue eyes in her mind, and for once, her dreams weren't haunted by the past. Morning came too soon, as it always did. Abigail rose before dawn, washed her face in the basin of cold water, and dressed in her simple work dress, a serviceable navy blue with a white collar. She pinned her hair neatly, applied a touch of rose water to her wrists, and headed downstairs to help Mr. Jensen open the store. The morning passed in a blur of customers and tasks, measuring fabric for Mrs. Peterson's new curtains, weighing coffee beans for the boarding house proprietress, and carefully recording each transaction in the ledger. By midday, Abigail had almost convinced herself that her encounter with the blue-eyed cowboy had been a figment of her imagination, a momentary break from the monotony of her existence. But at 2:30, the bell above the door jingled, and Cole Newman stepped into the mercantile, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Sunlight from the windows caught in his sandy hair, giving it golden highlights. He wore a clean blue shirt today, tucked into worn denim pants, with a leather vest that had seen better days but suited him nonetheless. "Afternoon, Mrs. James," he said, nodding politely as he approached the counter where she stood. "Mr. Newman," she acknowledged, hoping her voice sounded more composed than she felt. "What can I help you with today? I find myself in need of various supplies," he replied, placing a folded piece of paper on the counter. "I've made a list, if you'd be so kind." Abigail unfolded the paper and scanned the neat, surprisingly elegant handwriting. Coffee, sugar, salt, bacon, beans, ammunition for a Winchester rifle, 2 new shirts, a box of matches, and several other trail necessities. "When do you plan to leave Keeler?" she asked, moving around the counter to gather the items. "That depends," he said, following her at a respectful distance. "On what?" "On whether I find what I'm looking for." Something in his tone made her glance up sharply, but his expression was unreadable. "And what might that be, Mr. Newman?" A small smile played at his lips. "When I know for certain, you'll be the first to hear of it, Mrs. James." Abigail felt a flush creeping up her neck and turned quickly to the shelf of canned goods. "Will you be requiring a sack for these items?" "Yes, madam, and perhaps some information if you're willing to provide it." She reached for a canvas sack from beneath the counter. "What sort of information?" "I'm looking for a place to stay for a few days, somewhere more comfortable than the livery stable where I spent last night. Mrs. Hollister runs a boarding house on Pine Street," Abigail replied. "It's clean and reasonably priced. She serves a decent meal, too." "Thank you kindly." Cole watched as she efficiently packed his supplies into the sack. "You're good at this," he observed. "At what? Packing supplies?" "At knowing what people need before they ask." Abigail paused, a tin of coffee in her hand. "It's my job, Mr. Newman." "Cole," he said. "Please call me Cole." She resumed her task without acknowledging his request. "That will be $4.65. He reached into his pocket and produced a leather pouch, counting out the exact amount. As she took the money, their fingers brushed momentarily, sending an unexpected jolt through Abigail's body. She quickly withdrew her hand and busied herself with the cash drawer. "Will there be anything else?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. "Just one thing," he replied. "Will you be watching the sunset from your usual spot this evening?" The question caught her off guard. Yes, I imagine I will be." "Then perhaps I might join you again if you've no objection." Abigail finally looked up at him, searching his face for some hidden motive. But all she saw was sincerity in those blue eyes and something else, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "I suppose that would be all right," she said finally. "Until this evening, then." Cole picked up his supplies and headed toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Thank you, Mrs. James." "Abigail," she said impulsively. "My name is Abigail." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "Until sunset, Abigail." After he left, she stood staring at the door for several long moments, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. Mr. Jensen, emerging from the storeroom, cleared his throat loudly. "I'd be careful of that one if I were you, Mrs. James," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Drifters like him are trouble more often than not." "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Jensen," Abigail replied stiffly. The older man sighed. "I've seen the way he looks at you. Just be careful. You've been through enough already." Abigail nodded, though inwardly she bristled at the implication that she couldn't make her own judgments. "Thank you for your concern. I'll keep it in mind." The rest of the afternoon dragged by with excruciating slowness. When at last Mr. Jensen told her she could go, Abigail hurried to her room to freshen up before sunset. She chided herself for such vanity. What did it matter how she looked? But still she changed into her one good dress, a forest green that brought out the color of her eyes, and let her hair down before repinning it more carefully. By the time she reached the bench, the sun was already beginning its descent, painting the western sky in shades of gold and orange. She sat in her usual spot, hands folded in her lap, and waited, telling herself she wouldn't be disappointed if he didn't come. But he did come, just as the sun touched the mountain peaks. He appeared without sound, almost as if he'd materialized out of the evening air, and once again asked, "Mind if I sit a spell?" And despite herself, despite all the warnings she'd given herself throughout the day, Abigail smiled and moved over to make room for him. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted as he sat beside her. "I gave my word," he replied simply. "Besides, I couldn't pass up another sunset with a beautiful woman." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Newman, Cole," he corrected gently. "Cole," she conceded. "I appreciate the compliment, but there's no need for flattery." He turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "It's not flattery, Abigail. You are beautiful, especially when the sunset catches in your hair like it's doing right now." She had no response to that, so she turned her attention back to the horizon, where the sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the town. "Tell me about yourself," Cole said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "What brought you to Keeler?" Abigail hesitated. She rarely spoke of her past, finding it easier to let people draw their own conclusions, but something about this man made her want to share the truth. "My husband died last year," she began. "Consumption. We'd been married for 5 years, no children. After his death, I discovered he'd left substantial debts. I had to sell everything to pay them off, and even that wasn't enough." She paused, surprised at how steady her voice remained as she recounted the painful events. "His former business partner offered to help me. But his help came with conditions I wasn't willing to accept, so I took what little money I had left and headed west. I'd heard that women could find respectable work in growing towns, and when I reached Keeler, Mr. Jensen needed assistance in the store." "You're very brave," Cole said quietly. Abigail laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Brave? No, desperate perhaps, but not brave. Taking a chance on a new life alone rather than compromising your principles, that's courage in my book." She glanced at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "And what about you?" "What's your story, Cole Newman?" He leaned back slightly, his eyes on the horizon. "Not much to tell. Born in Tennessee, raised by my mother after my father was killed at Shiloh. Left home at 16, worked as a ranch hand in Texas for a few years, then started trading horses. Been moving ever since. No wife, no family?" she asked. A shadow passed over his face. "There was someone once, Sarah was her name. We were engaged to be married, but she took fever and died before the wedding day. That was 8 years ago." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "Life goes on," he replied, though the pain in his voice belied the simplicity of the statement. "I've crossed paths with a few women since then, but none that made me want to settle down. Until," he trailed off, and Abigail felt her heart skip a beat. "Until." She prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "Until I'm not entirely sure yet, but I aim to find out." The intensity of his gaze made Abigail look away first. "The sun is almost gone," she observed, her voice not quite steady. "So it is," he agreed. "But the stars are coming out. Do you ever stay to watch them?" "No," she admitted. "I usually return to my room after sunset." "Would you consider staying a bit longer tonight? The stars over the desert are something to behold." Abigail knew she should refuse. Sitting alone with a man after dark, even in a public place, could damage her reputation in a small town like Keeler. But the thought of returning to her solitary room seemed suddenly unbearable. "I suppose a few minutes more wouldn't hurt," she said. Cole smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Abigail." They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, first one by one, then in clusters, until the vast canopy above them was ablaze with twinkling lights. "It's beautiful," Abigail murmured, tilting her head back to take in the spectacle. "More beautiful than anything man could create," Cole agreed. "When I'm on the trail, sleeping under the open sky, those stars are my companions." Makes a man feel both small and significant at the same time, if that makes any sense. "It does," she said. "Like we're just specks in this vast universe, but somehow we still matter." He nodded, and she was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders nearly touching. The night had grown cooler, and Abigail shivered slightly. "You're cold," Cole observed. "We should get you back." "I'm fine," she protested, though another shiver belied her words. Without asking permission, he slipped off his leather vest and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was still warm from his body, and it carried his scent leather, horses, and something uniquely him that she couldn't name. "Thank you," she said softly. "My pleasure." Their eyes met in the starlight, and for a moment, Abigail thought he might lean closer, might try to kiss her. Part of her apart she'd thought long dormant wanted him to, but Cole merely smiled and stood, offering his hand to help her up. "May I walk you back to the mercantile?" he asked. Abigail accepted his hand and rose from the bench. "Yes, thank you." They walked slowly through the quiet streets, their path illuminated only by the stars and the occasional light from a window. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken possibilities. At the door to the mercantile, Abigail reluctantly removed his vest and handed it back to him. "Thank you for the company, Cole." "The pleasure was mine, Abigail." He took the vest but made no move to leave. "Would it be presumptuous of me to ask if I might join you again tomorrow evening?" She should say no. She should maintain her distance, protect her heart from the inevitable pain when he moved on, as men like him always did. But instead, she heard herself say, "I'd like that." The smile that spread across his face was worth the risk, she decided. "Until tomorrow, then." "Sleep well, Abigail." "Good night, Cole." She watched as he walked away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she enter the building and climb the stairs to her room. That night, for the first time in months, Abigail fell asleep with a smile on her face. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation. Abigail found herself watching the door every time the bell jingled, hoping to see Cole's tall figure. But he didn't come to the store that day, and by the time Mr. Jensen released her for the evening, she was fighting a growing sense of disappointment. Perhaps he's already left town, she thought as she made her way to the bench. Men like Cole Newman didn't stay in one place for long. It was foolish to expect anything more than a passing acquaintance. But as she approached her usual spot, her heart leaped at the sight of a familiar figure already seated on the bench, hat in his hands, watching the beginnings of the sunset. "You're early," she said by way of greeting. Cole turned, and the smile that lit his face at the sight of her sent warmth coursing through Abigail's body. "I didn't want to miss a moment," he replied, standing as she approached. "Of the sunset," she asked, taking her place on the bench, "of your company." Abigail felt her cheeks grow warm as he sat beside her, closer than before but still maintaining a respectful distance. "I didn't see you in town today," she said, trying to sound casual. "I rode out to check on a herd of horses about 10 miles east of here," he explained. "A rancher named Thornton is looking to sell a few, and I might be able to turn a profit if I can get them to the right buyer in San Francisco." "So you'll be leaving soon," Abigail said, unable to keep a note of disappointment from her voice. Cole studied her face for a moment before answering. "That depends," he said finally. "On what? On whether I find a reason to stay." Their eyes met, and the intensity in his blue gaze made Abigail's breath catch. "And have you?" she asked softly. "I'm beginning to think so," he replied, "but I'm not a man who rushes into things, Abigail." "Not anymore," she nodded, oddly relieved by his caution. "That's good. Neither am I a woman who rushes, that is." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sun continue its descent, painting the sky in ever-deepening shades of red and gold. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the desert. "I've been wondering," Cole said suddenly, "why this particular spot? Why watch the sunset from here every evening?" Abigail considered the question. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "I discovered it by accident my first week in town. There's something about the view from here, the way the mountains frame the sunset, perhaps, but more than that." She paused, searching for the right words. "It's the moment itself, day becoming night. It's a transition, a reminder that nothing stays the same. Even grief changes eventually, becomes something you can carry rather than something that carries you." She stopped, embarrassed by her unexpected eloquence. "That probably sounds foolish." "Not at all," Cole said quietly. "It makes perfect sense." He hesitated, then added, "The first year after Sarah died, I used to watch the sunrise every morning. It reminded me that no matter how dark the night, light always returns." Abigail turned to look at him, struck by the parallel in their coping mechanisms. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? Sunset and sunrise." "Maybe that's why our paths crossed," he suggested, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The universe has a strange way of balancing things out." As the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the mountains, Abigail found herself reluctant for the moment to end. "Would you?" she began, then faltered. "Would I what?" Cole prompted gently. "Would you like to join me for supper?" she blurted out. "I have some stew I made yesterday and fresh bread. It's nothing fancy, but I'd be honored," he interrupted, his expression warm. "Though I should warn you, I've eaten my own cooking for so long that my standards are embarrassingly low." Abigail laughed, a sound that surprised her with its lightness. "Well then, I'm sure my cooking will seem positively gourmet by comparison." They walked back to the mercantile together, their conversation flowing easily now. Cole told her about his travels through the territories, and Abigail shared stories of her life in Chicago before her husband's death. By the time they reached her small room above the store, it felt as though they'd known each other for years rather than days. Abigail's quarters were modest, but neat: a single room with a small stove in one corner, a narrow bed against the wall, a table with 2 chairs, and a chest for her few belongings. A colorful quilt, one of the few possessions she'd brought from her former life, added a touch of warmth to the otherwise Spartan space. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious as Cole ducked through the low doorway. "It's a home," he replied simply. "That's more than many can claim." While Cole washed up at the basin by the door, Abigail busied herself with reheating the stew and slicing the bread. She was acutely aware of his presence in her small space, of how his broad shoulders seemed to make the room shrink, of the domestic intimacy of preparing a meal for him. They ate by lamplight, the golden glow casting long shadows across the table. The stew was simple beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions, but Cole ate with obvious appreciation, accepting a second helping with a grateful smile. "This is the best meal I've had in months," he said, breaking off another piece of bread. "You're a fine cook, Abigail." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by the compliment. "Though as you said, your standards may be somewhat compromised by trail food." He chuckled, the sound warm and rich in the quiet room. "Fair point, but I stand by my assessment." As they ate, they continued to share stories. Abigail learned that Cole had fought briefly with the Union Army toward the end of the Civil War, though he'd been little more than a boy at the time. He'd worked as a cowboy on the great cattle drives from Texas, had prospected for gold in Colorado unsuccessfully, and had once ridden with the Pony Express for a short time. "You've led quite the adventurous life," Abigail remarked as she cleared their plates. "It sounds more exciting in the telling than in the living," Cole replied, leaning back in his chair. "Mostly it was hard work, bad weather, and loneliness. And yet you kept moving," she observed, returning to the table with coffee. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "After Sarah died, staying in one place felt impossible. Like if I stopped moving, the grief would catch up and swallow me whole." "I understand that feeling," Abigail said softly. Cole's eyes met hers across the table. "I believe you do." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think about moving on from Keeler? It's not exactly a thriving metropolis." Abigail considered the question as she poured coffee into their cups. "Sometimes, but for now it's enough. I have work, a roof over my head, and—" She paused, then added quietly, "And now I have sunset conversations to look forward to." The smile that spread across Cole's face made her heart skip a beat. "As do I," he said, "more than you know." They lingered over coffee as the evening deepened around them. Outside, the sounds of the town gradually quieted, replaced by the gentle whisper of the desert wind. It was well past proper visiting hours, but neither seemed inclined to acknowledge that fact. Finally, when the last drop of coffee had been drunk and the conversation had lapsed into comfortable silence, Cole rose reluctantly to his feet. "I should go," he said, though his expression suggested he'd rather do anything else. "People talk in small towns, and I wouldn't want to damage your reputation." Abigail stood as well, suddenly very aware of how close they were in the confined space. "Yes, you're right, of course." He took his hat from the hook by the door but made no move to put it on. Instead, he turned to face her, his expression serious. "Abigail, I want you to know that I respect you. Whatever happens or doesn't happen between us, that won't change." "Thank you," she whispered, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. Cole took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "May I call on you properly? Take you for a ride in the countryside this Sunday, perhaps?" Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. "Yes," she managed. "I'd like that very much." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I'll see you tomorrow evening for sunset and Sunday for our ride." "I'll look forward to it," she replied, meaning every word. Cole hesitated, then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. His lips were warm and slightly rough, and the brief contact sent a shiver down Abigail's spine. "Good night, Abigail James," he said softly, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night, Cole Newman," she replied, her voice barely audible. He placed his hat on his head, tipped it slightly, and then he was gone, leaving only his scent and the memory of his kiss behind. Abigail touched her cheek where his lips had been, a smile spreading across her face. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something like hope blooming in her heart. The next few days fell into a pattern that quickly became the highlight of Abigail's existence. Each morning she would rise and work at the mercantile, her mind constantly drifting to thoughts of the evening to come. Cole would often stop by the store during the day, sometimes to purchase small items he claimed to need, sometimes simply to say hello and exchange a few words under Mr. Jensen's increasingly disapproving gaze. And every evening without fail, they would meet at the bench to watch the sunset together, talking until the stars emerged. Sometimes they would then share a simple meal in her room, Other times they would walk through the quiet streets of Keeler, their shoulders occasionally brushing, both acutely aware of the growing connection between them. By the time Sunday arrived, Abigail was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness about their planned outing. She rose earlier than usual, taking extra care with her appearance. She wore her best dress, a sky-blue cotton with delicate white piping that she'd altered to match the current fashion as best she could, and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. Cole arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, as promised, driving a rented buggy. He wore clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and when he helped her into the buggy, Abigail caught the scent of bay rum. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirts nervously. "You look quite handsome yourself." His smile was warm as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "I borrowed this rig from the livery stable," he explained as they set off. "I thought we might drive out to the lake I discovered about 5 miles from town. It's a pretty spot for a picnic if you're agreeable." "That sounds lovely," Abigail said, noticing the basket tucked behind the seat. "Did you prepare a picnic as well?" Cole chuckled. "I wouldn't subject you to my cooking. Mrs. Hollister at the boarding house put it together for me." She seemed quite pleased about our outing apparently. She's been hoping someone would court that poor widow properly, as she put it. Abigail felt her cheeks warm at the word court. "Word travels quickly in Keeler," she murmured. "Does that bother you?" Cole asked, glancing at her. "The talk, I mean." She considered the question as they left the town behind, the buggy rolling smoothly along the dusty road. "No," she said finally. "A year ago it would have mortified me, but I've learned that other people's opinions matter far less than my own happiness." "A valuable lesson," Cole agreed, "and one many people never learn." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the road winding through sagebrush and scrub pine. The day was pleasantly warm, the sky a vast blue canopy overhead. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains stood as silent sentinels, their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring season. "May I ask you something personal?" Cole said suddenly. "You may ask," Abigail replied. "Though I reserve the right not to answer," he smiled at that. "Fair enough." "I was wondering about your husband, what was he like? If you don't mind talking about him, that is." The question surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "Thomas was kind," she said slowly, searching for the right words. "Intelligent. He was an accountant for a shipping company in Chicago. We had a comfortable life, a nice home. He worked long hours but always brought me flowers on Fridays." "You loved him," Cole observed. "Yes," Abigail said honestly. "Though I sometimes think we married more out of mutual respect and compatibility than passion. We were good friends, Thomas and I." "That's a solid foundation for marriage," Cole remarked, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. "It was," she agreed. "But there were times when I wondered if there should be more. Feeling, I suppose." She stopped, embarrassed by the admission. Cole was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "Sarah and I had the opposite problem," he said finally. "All passion and dreams with very little practical consideration of what marriage would actually entail. We were young, I was 23, she was 20. We thought love would conquer all obstacles. And now," Abigail asked softly. "What do you think now?" He glanced at her, his expression serious. "Now I think that both are necessary, the practical foundation of respect and compatibility and the fire that makes you feel truly alive. Without both, something vital is missing." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Abigail felt as though something significant had passed between them, some understanding that went beyond words. The moment was broken by their arrival at the lake, a small, pristine body of water nestled in a hollow, surrounded by pine trees and flowering brush. Cole helped Abigail down from the buggy, his hands strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. They spread a blanket beneath a large pine tree with a view of the water, and Cole unpacked the picnic basket: fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, apple tarts, and a bottle of lemonade. It was a feast by Keeler standards, and Abigail said as much. "Mrs. Hollister was determined to impress you," Cole explained with a chuckle. I think she's appointed herself my unofficial matchmaker. And how do you feel about that? Abigail asked, keeping her tone light despite the sudden racing of her heart. Cole looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. I'm finding that I don't mind the idea at all. They ate in companionable conversation, discussing books they'd read, places they'd visited, dreams they'd harbored. After the meal, they walked along the shore of the lake, picking up interesting stones and watching the occasional fish jump. Tell me about your horse trading business, Abigail said as they strolled. Is it profitable? It can be, Cole replied. I buy horses where they're plentiful and prices are low, then sell them where they're needed. The Army is often a good customer, as are stagecoach companies and expanding ranches, but it's not regular income. Sometimes I do well, other times I barely break even. It must be difficult, never knowing when your next payday will come, she observed. He nodded. It's not a business that lends itself to settling down, at least that's what I've always told myself. He stopped walking and turned to face her. But lately I've been wondering if that's just an excuse. An excuse for what? Abigail asked, though she thought she knew the answer. For not taking chances, for not building something permanent. He took her hand in his calloused thumb rubbing gently across her knuckles. Abigail, I know we've known each other only a short time, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are genuine. I haven't felt this way about anyone since Sarah. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. I feel the same, she admitted softly. It scares me how quickly this has happened. It scares me too, he said with a small smile, but some fears are worth facing, don't you think? In answer, Abigail reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Cole closed his eyes briefly at her touch, then opened them, his gaze intense with unspoken feelings. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Abigail responded without hesitation, her arms sliding around his neck as his hands found her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, awakening sensations in Abigail that she'd never experienced before, not even with Thomas. This was different, more powerful, more consuming. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you on that bench, Cole admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I'm glad you finally did, Abigail replied, surprised by her own boldness. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the lake, talking, occasionally stealing kisses, and simply enjoying each other's company. By the time they drove back to Keeler, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in familiar hues of gold and crimson. Would you like to watch the sunset from our bench? Cole asked as they approached the town. Abigail smiled at the way he said our bench, as if it belonged to them alone. Yes, she said, I'd like that very much. They reached the bench just as the sun began its final descent behind the mountains. Cole helped Abigail down from the buggy, then tied the horses to a nearby hitching post before joining her on the bench. This time, he sat close enough that their shoulders touched, and after a moment's hesitation, he put his arm around her. Abigail leaned into his embrace, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. This feels right, she said quietly as they watched the sun sink lower. Yes, it does, Cole agreed, his voice rumbling pleasantly against her ear. I've been thinking, Abigail, a dangerous pastime, she teased. He chuckled. Indeed, nevertheless, I've been thinking about the horses I came to look at the Thornton herd. And I've decided to buy them. All of them? Abigail pulled back slightly to look at his face. All of them, but I thought you said there were over 20 horses in that herd. 27 to be exact, Cole confirmed. It will take nearly all the money I have, but I believe it's a sound investment. The Thornton spread is failing, the old man is ill, and his sons have no interest in ranching. He needs to sell, and I can get the horses at a fair price. But what will you do with so many horses? Abigail asked, puzzled by this sudden decision. Cole took a deep breath. That depends, he said, his eyes meeting hers, on whether you might consider a business proposition. A business proposition, Abigail repeated, even more confused now. Keeler needs a livery stable and horse trader who actually knows what they're doing, Cole explained. The current operation is poorly run. The owner is more interested in drinking than caring for the animals. I've been thinking that with the Thornton horses as a starting stock, a well-run stable could be profitable here. The mines may be fading, but there's still traffic through the town, and the Army outpost 30 miles north needs remounts regularly. Abigail's mind raced as she began to understand what he was suggesting. You're thinking of staying in Keeler, of establishing a business here. Yes, he said simply, with a partner if she's interested. A partner? Abigail's voice was barely above a whisper. Cole took both her hands in his. Abigail James, I know this is sudden, too sudden perhaps, but I've spent 8 years wandering, never finding a place that felt like home. Until I sat beside you on this bench and watched the sunset. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. We've known each other less than 2 weeks, and I respect that you need time to be sure of your feelings. But I want you to know that I intend to stay in Keeler, to build something here. And I hope when you're ready that you'll consider building it with me as my wife. Abigail stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Cole, you don't need to answer now, he interrupted gently. I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need. The sun had completely disappeared behind the mountains now, the sky darkening to deep purple. The first stars were beginning to appear, just as they had on the night they'd first extended their sunset watching. What if I don't need time? Abigail said suddenly, surprising even herself. What if I already know my answer? Cole's expression was a mixture of hope and uncertainty. And what answer would that be? In response, Abigail leaned forward and kissed him, putting all her newfound feelings into the gesture. When they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, yes. My answer is yes. The joy that spread across Cole's face was like nothing Abigail had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Are you sure? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want you to feel rushed. Abigail laughed, a sound of pure happiness. Cole Newman, I've spent the last year of my life being careful, being sensible, being afraid to trust my heart. But my heart recognizes you as if it's been waiting for you all along. So yes, I'm sure. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms tightening around her as if he never wanted to let go. When they finally separated, both were breathless and smiling like fools. We'll need to wait a proper amount of time, of course, Abigail said, suddenly practical, for propriety's sake. Cole nodded, though his expression suggested waiting would be a challenge. Of course, 3 months, perhaps 2, Abigail countered with a small smile. I find I'm not as concerned with propriety as I once was, he laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet evening air. 2 months it is then. Just long enough for me to establish the stable and build us a proper home. A home, Abigail repeated, the word filling her with warmth. I like the sound of that. As darkness settled completely around them, they remained on the bench, planning their future together under the vast canopy of stars. And when at last they walked back to the mercantile hand in hand, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she would never watch another sunset alone. The news of their engagement spread through Keeler like wildfire. By noon the following day, it seemed every resident of the small town had formed an opinion on the match. Most were supportive misses. Hollister at the boarding house claimed credit for bringing them together, while Mr. Jensen, after some initial reservations, gave his gruff blessing when Cole approached him formally to discuss his intentions. There were a few disapproving glances and whispered comments about the speed of the courtship, but Abigail found that she cared little for such opinions. Her happiness was a shield against judgment, and the tangible evidence of Cole's commitment in the form of his immediate actions to establish their future silenced most critics. True to his word, Cole purchased the Thornton herd the very next day, bringing all 27 horses to Keeler and temporarily housing them in the existing livery stable, while he negotiated to buy the business outright. The current owner, a man named Harley Jenkins who had indeed been more interested in the bottle than his business, was eager to sell once Cole named a fair price. With ownership of the livery stable secured, Cole set about improving the facilities. He hired 2 local men brothers named Michael and Joseph Garcia, who had worked as vaqueros in California before coming to Nevada to help with the renovation and the care of the horses. Under Cole's direction, the dilapidated stable was transformed. Stalls were repaired, the leaky roof fixed, fresh hay brought in, and the corral enlarged. Meanwhile, Abigail continued her work at the mercantile while helping Cole with the bookkeeping for his new business in the evenings. They fell into an easy partnership, each bringing different skills to their shared enterprise. And every evening without fail, no matter how busy the day had been, they would sit together on their bench and watch the sunset, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the peaceful moment and each other's company. 2 weeks after Cole's proposal, he purchased a plot of land on the edge of town, 2 acres with a view of both the mountains and the desert. It was there that he began building their home. Nothing fancy to start, he explained as they stood on the property, his arm around her waist. 4 rooms, a kitchen, a parlor, and 2 bedrooms, but built solid with room to expand as our family grows. Abigail leaned into his embrace, her heart full at the thought of a family with this man. "It sounds perfect," she said. With the help of the Garcia brothers and several other men from town, the house began to take shape. Cole worked on it every moment he could spare from the stable, often continuing by lantern light well into the evening. Abigail would bring him meals, watching with growing excitement as their future home rose from the desert floor. One evening in late May, about a month after Cole's arrival in Keeler, they sat on their bench watching the sunset. The air was warm, scented with sage and the promise of summer. Cole seemed unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful as the golden light painted his profile. "What are you thinking about?" Abigail asked, her hand finding his. He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "I've been thinking about the future, our future. The stable is doing better than I expected. I've already sold 4 horses to the Army outpost at a good profit, and there's talk of a new stage line that might need teams." "That's wonderful news," Abigail said, squeezing his hand. "Yes," he agreed, "but it got me thinking about your situation. You're still working for Jensen, spending all day in that store, then helping me with the books in the evening. It's a lot to ask of you." "I don't mind," she assured him. "I enjoy being busy, and Mr. Jensen has been very understanding about reducing my hours so I can help you." Cole nodded. "I know, but I was wondering if you might consider leaving the mercantile altogether and becoming my full partner in the stable business. Your bookkeeping skills are far superior to mine, and you have a good eye for horses. With you running the business side of things, I could focus on training and trading." Abigail stared at him, surprised by the suggestion. "Are you sure? I mean, I know almost nothing about horses other than what you've taught me this past month." "You're a quick learner," Cole said with a smile. "And you understand commerce better than I ever will. We'd make a good team, Abigail. We already do." She considered the proposal, finding that she liked the idea very much. Working alongside Cole every day, building something together, it was far more appealing than continuing at the mercantile, where her role would never grow beyond shop assistant. "I'd need to give Mr. Jensen proper notice," she said finally. "At least 2 weeks." Cole's face lit up with a broad smile. "So you'll do it?" "Yes," Abigail replied, returning his smile. "I would be honored to be your business partner, Cole Newman, in addition to being your wife in 6 weeks' time." He pulled her into his arms, his kiss full of promise and joy. "You've made me the happiest man in Nevada," he murmured against her lips. "I believe that honor belongs to me," she corrected, her arms tightening around his neck. "The happiest woman, that is." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Abigail gave notice at the mercantile and began working full-time at the stable, learning everything she could about horses and the business of trading them. She discovered, somewhat to her surprise, that she had a natural affinity for the animals. They seemed to respond to her gentle but firm manner, and she quickly mastered the basics of horsemanship under Cole's patient tutelage. The house progressed steadily, and by the time mid-June arrived, it was nearly complete. The structure was simple but solidly built, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of both sunrise and sunset. Inside, the rooms were spacious and bright, with windows designed to catch the desert breezes. Cole had ordered furniture from San Francisco, and Abigail had sewn curtains and cushions in the evenings, putting her own touch on their future home. As the wedding date approached, preparations intensified. Abigail had ordered a special dress from a dressmaker in Carson City, nothing extravagant, but far nicer than anything available in Keeler. Cole had his best suit cleaned and pressed, and Mrs. Hollister took charge of organizing the wedding feast, enlisting the help of most of the women in town. The ceremony itself would be simple, performed by the circuit preacher who visited Keeler once a month, with the entire town invited to witness the event. It would be held in the small church on the edge of town, followed by a celebration in the town square. The night before the wedding, Cole and Abigail sat on their bench, watching what would be their last sunset as an unmarried couple. The sky was particularly spectacular that evening, a riot of color that seemed a good omen for their future together. "Are you nervous?" Cole asked, his arm around her shoulders. "A little," Abigail admitted, "but not about marrying you, just about the ceremony itself being the center of attention." He chuckled. "I know what you mean. I'm a private person by nature. All those eyes watching us tomorrow is a bit daunting. We'll get through it together," she said, leaning into his embrace. "And then we'll have our home, our business, and the rest of our lives to look forward to." "The rest of our lives," Cole repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am that I happened to ride into Keeler just as the sun was setting and found you sitting on this bench." "Do you think it was luck?" Abigail asked softly, "or something more?" Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. "I've never been a particularly religious man," he said finally, "but I can't help feeling that there was something providential about our meeting, as if all those years of wandering were leading me here to you." Abigail turned her face up to his, her eyes shining in the fading light. "I believe that too. After Thomas died, I thought my life was over, that the best I could hope for was a quiet existence, getting by day to day. I never imagined I could feel this way again, this alive." "I love you, Abigail James," Cole said, his voice husky with emotion. "Tomorrow you'll become Abigail Newman, but no matter what name you bear, my heart is yours now and always. And mine is yours," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Now and always." Their kiss was tender, full of promise for the future they would build together. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they remained on the bench, wrapped in each other's arms, savoring this final evening of anticipation before their new life began. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the June sky a perfect blue canopy over Keeler. Abigail woke early in her room above the mercantile, her heart fluttering with excitement and joy. This was the last morning she would wake in this small space. By tonight, she would be in her new home, in her new life, with her new husband. Mrs. Hollister and several other women from town arrived mid-morning to help her prepare. They brought flowers gathered from gardens, and the surrounding desert golden poppies, purple lupine, and fragrant sage blossoms to weave into her hair and fashion into a simple bouquet. Her dress, when she put it on, drew gasps of admiration from the women. It was ivory rather than white, in deference to her widow status, but the design was thoroughly modern, a fitted bodice with delicate lace overlay, and a skirt that flowed elegantly rather than billowing out in the excessive hoops of previous fashion. With her hair styled in soft waves adorned with tiny flowers, and a touch of color in her cheeks from both excitement and the judicious application of rouge, Abigail hardly recognized her reflection in the small mirror. "You look beautiful, my dear Mrs. Hollister declared, her eyes suspiciously moist. "That cowboy of yours won't know what hit him." Meanwhile, at the boarding house, Cole was receiving his own assistance in preparation, though of a less elaborate nature. Michael Garcia had volunteered to serve as his best man, helping him with his tie and offering a steady stream of good-natured advice about married life, most of which Cole took with a grain of salt, given that Michael himself was unmarried. "You nervous?" Michael asked as Cole buttoned his vest, a new one purchased specifically for the occasion. "Oddly enough, no," Cole replied truthfully. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." By 2 o'clock, the small church was filled to capacity with nearly every resident of Keeler in attendance. Cole stood at the altar, looking more handsome than Abigail had ever seen him in his dark suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. When she appeared at the back of the church on Mr. Jensen's arm, the older man having agreed to give her away, Cole's expression of awe and adoration made her heart swell with love. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. Cole had purchased a ring in Carson City, a slender band of gold with tiny leaves engraved around it, symbolizing growth and new beginnings. When he slipped it onto her finger, his hands were steady but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Cole's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, appropriate for a church full of onlookers but hinting at the deeper passion they would share in private. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Newman, the cheers and applause that erupted brought color to Abigail's cheeks and a broad smile to Cole's face. The celebration that followed in the town square was unlike anything Keeler had seen in years. Tables were laden with food contributed by every household: roasted meats, casseroles, pies, and cakes. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a guitar, and soon music filled the air. Children darted between the adults, playing games and stealing sweets when they thought no one was looking. Cole and Abigail moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, sharing their joy with the community that had, in a short time, become their own. As the afternoon progressed into evening, they danced together beneath the open sky, their movements perfectly matched, as if they'd been partners for years rather than months. "Are you happy, Mrs. Newman?" Cole asked as they swayed to a slow melody, his arms holding her close. "Completely," Abigail replied, her eyes shining up at him. "And you, more than I ever thought possible," he said, bending to place a kiss on her forehead. "Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to the moment when we can slip away from all these well-wishers and begin our life together properly." The heat in his gaze sent a shiver of anticipation through Abigail. "I believe that moment may be approaching," she murmured, nodding toward Mrs. Hollister, who was making her way through the crowd toward them with a determined expression. "Time for you two lovebirds to be on your way," the older woman announced when she reached them. "We've prepared your house fresh linens on the bed, pantry stocked, everything you'll need for at least a week." She winked at Abigail, who felt her cheeks flush. "Though I suspect you won't be doing much cooking for the next day or two, Mrs. Hollister." Abigail exclaimed, scandalized yet amused by the woman's frankness. "Oh, hush," the older woman replied with a laugh. "I've been married 3 times, child. I know how newlyweds are. Now go on, your wagon is ready, and the town has had enough of your mooning glances at each other." Sure enough, the buckboard wagon that Cole used for hauling stable supplies had been transformed, cleaned, decorated with flowers and ribbons, and hitched to Cole's favorite horse, a gentle bay gelding named Rusty. Their few belongings had already been loaded in the back, and as they approached the vehicle, the townsfolk gathered around to see them off with cheers and good-natured teasing. Cole helped Abigail into the wagon, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a final wave to their friends, they set off toward their new home, the sound of cheering and clapping following them down the street. The 2-mile drive to their house was peaceful after the excitement of the day. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the desert in golden light that seemed a blessing on their union. Cole kept one hand on the reins, the other holding Abigail's, their fingers intertwined. "Look," he said as they approached their property, "our first sunset as husband and wife." Abigail followed his gaze to the western horizon, where the sun was just beginning to dip toward the mountains. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "even more beautiful than usual somehow." "Because we're seeing it together," Cole replied, squeezing her hand, "as we will for all the days to come." Their house stood waiting for them, the new lumber glowing warm in the evening light. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop in front and jumped down, then reached up to lift Abigail from her seat. But instead of setting her on the ground, he swept her into his arms completely. "Cole," she exclaimed, laughing as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he replied with a grin. "It's tradition, isn't it?" "I believe it is," she agreed, her heart full of love for this man who continually surprised her with his thoughtfulness. He carried her up the steps and across the porch, pausing at the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Newman," he said softly, his eyes full of promise. "Home," Abigail repeated, the word filled with new meaning. "I like the sound of that." As Cole pushed open the door and carried her inside, the last rays of the sun streamed through the western windows, bathing them in golden light. Outside, the desert began its transition to evening, the first star appearing in the darkening sky. But for the first time since coming to Keeler, Abigail didn't watch the sunset from her bench. She was too busy beginning her new life with the man who had changed everything when he'd asked, "Mind if I sit a spell?" The years that followed were the happiest of Abigail's life. The Newman Horse Trading Company, as they officially named their business, flourished under their joint management. Cole's expertise with horses and Abigail's head for business proved a winning combination. They developed a reputation for fair dealings and quality stock that spread throughout the region, attracting buyers from as far away as San Francisco and Salt Lake City. Their home expanded along with their business, first with the addition of a proper dining room and study, later with 2 more bedrooms when their family began to grow. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Michael Newman, was born a year after their wedding. He was a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, and from the moment he could walk, he showed a natural affinity for horses that made Cole beam with pride. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Newman, named for Cole's first love and Abigail's mother. She was a delicate beauty with a will of iron, a combination that both delighted and challenged her parents, as she grew from infant to toddler to determined young girl. Their family was completed 3 years after Sarah's birth. With the arrival of twins, a boy and girl, they named William Jensen Newman and Rebecca Hollister Newman, honoring the 2 people who had played such significant roles in bringing them together. The twins were as different as could be, quiet and thoughtful, Becky boisterous and adventurous, but they shared an unbreakable bond that fascinated their older siblings. Through all the changes and growth in their lives, Cole and Abigail maintained one unbreakable tradition: they watched the sunset together as often as possible. Sometimes they were joined by their children, sometimes by friends, but often it was just the 2 of them, sitting close together, reflecting on the day and the blessings in their lives. The original bench in town eventually rotted away, but Cole built a new one for their home, a wider, sturdier version that he placed on the western edge of their property, offering an unobstructed view of the mountains and the setting sun. It was there that they celebrated anniversaries, made important decisions, and occasionally sought solace during difficult times. There were challenges, of course. The winter of 1883 was particularly harsh, with snow that trapped them in their home for nearly 2 weeks and killed 3 of their horses despite their best efforts to protect the animals. A drought in the summer of 1885 drove up the price of hay and nearly depleted their savings. And there was the terrifying week in 1887 when 3-year-old Sarah contracted a fever that had the doctor shaking his head grimly until the crisis passed, and she opened her eyes, asking weakly for a glass of water, as if she hadn't been at death's door just hours before. But through every hardship, every joy, every ordinary day, Cole and Abigail faced life as partners equal in their commitment to each other and their family, bound by a love that had bloomed from a chance encounter at sunset. On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children had been put to bed with extra stories and promises of a special family outing the next day, Cole took Abigail's hand and led her to their bench. The sun was just beginning its descent, the sky already hinting at the spectacular colors to come. 10 years, Cole said as they sat, his arm automatically going around her shoulders as it had countless times before. Sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday, and other times I can't remember a life before you. Abigail leaned into his embrace, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder. At 36, She was still beautiful, her auburn hair now threaded with a few strands of silver, laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life well lived. "The best 10 years of my life," she said softly, "though I have high hopes for the next 10 and the 10 after that." Cole chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "As do I, my love, as do I." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the land that had become so dear to them. Their property had expanded over the years to include 10 acres, with a large stable, a corral, a bunkhouse for the hands they employed, and fields where they grew hay for their horses. Keeler itself had changed as well. The silver mines had played out completely by 1884, but unlike many boom towns that turned to ghost towns when the ore ran dry, Keeler had adapted. Its location on the main route between several larger settlements gave it continued purpose as a way station, and businesses like the Newman Horse Trading Company helped maintain its viability. It was no longer the bustling place it had been during the mining days, but it was a stable community with a school, a proper church, and families who had chosen to put down roots. "Do you ever wonder," Abigail said suddenly, "what might have happened if you hadn't stopped in Keeler that day? If you'd continued on to San Francisco as you originally planned?" Cole considered the question, his fingers absently playing with a strand of her hair. "I used to think about that occasionally in the early days," he admitted, "but not anymore. I've come to believe that some things are meant to be, that no matter what path I took, I would have found my way to you eventually." "That's a lovely thought," Abigail said, smiling up at him, "that we were destined for each other." "Well, look at the evidence," Cole replied. "What are the chances that a horse trader from Tennessee and a widow from Chicago would both end up in a tiny mining town in Nevada at exactly the same time? And that I would happen to walk by just as you were watching the sunset? When you put it that way, it does seem like more than mere coincidence," Abigail agreed. "Precisely." Cole kissed the top of her head. "Some things are written in the stars, my love. We're just fortunate that we recognized our destiny when it presented itself." The sun touched the mountain peaks, its golden light spreading across the landscape like a benediction. After a moment, Cole reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I have something for you," he said, placing it in her hand. "A small token to mark our decade together." Abigail opened the pouch carefully, tipping its contents into her palm. A delicate gold locket emerged, oval-shaped with an intricate pattern engraved on its surface. "Cole, it's beautiful," she breathed, opening it to find miniature photographs of their 4 children inside a feat of considerable planning, given how difficult it was to get all 4 to sit still for the photographer at once. "Turn it over," Cole said softly. She did, finding an inscription on the back. "For my sunset girl, forever yours." See, tears sprang to Abigail's eyes as she read the words. "Oh, Cole," she whispered, unable to express the fullness of her heart. "Too sentimental?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "No," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "Perfect, absolutely perfect. Will you put it on me?" Cole took the locket and carefully fastened it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. The gold caught the light of the setting sun, glinting like a fallen star. "Thank you," Abigail said, her hand covering the locket where it lay against her heart. "Not just for this, but for everything, our home, our family, our life together. I never dreamed I could be this happy." "Nor did I," Cole replied, his voice husky with emotion. "You gave me a reason to stop wandering, Abigail. A reason to build something lasting." As the sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, they sealed their 10th anniversary with a kiss as tender and promising as their first. The years had deepened their connection, their love growing stronger with each challenge faced together, each joy shared, each sunset witnessed side by side. Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Abigail whispered, "Do you ever regret it?" Giving up the freedom of the trail for a settled life, Cole propped himself up on one elbow to look at her, his expression visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. The trail was lonely, Abigail." I didn't understand how lonely until I wasn't alone anymore. You, the children, our home, this is true freedom. The freedom to love and be loved. The freedom to build something that will outlast us both." Abigail reached up to touch his face, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had changed her life with a simple question on a quiet evening 10 years ago. "I love you, Cole Newman," she said softly, "more with each passing day." "And I love you, Abigail Newman," he replied, lowering his head to kiss her. "More than all the sunsets we've watched together and all the sunsets yet to come." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge of their shared past and the promise of their future together, the stars continued their ageless dance across the desert sky, silent witnesses to a love that had begun with a sunset and a simple question. "Mind if I sit a spell?"